First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at FEBC.org.
If we're doing the Jesus way right, people will say these kinds of things. I don't get Christians, but our workplace is a lot better place because they work here. As Jesus says, it's our good works that shine the light into the world.
His is a familiar voice around the country. Joe Stowell joins us for this edition of First Person. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Joe's new book is titled This Light of Mine, Living Like Jesus in a Non-Jesus World. Stay tuned for our conversation. And thanks for listening today and each week. Whenever you miss one of our interviews on the radio, just go to our website, firstpersoninterview.com, or use one of the many smartphone podcast apps and subscribe to First Person with Wayne Shepherd. Also, leave a message for us or connect with other listeners by using our Facebook page, First Person Interview. We'd be happy to interact there with you. Dr. Joe Stowell retired from academic life and church leadership. He continues to write and speak as well, though, and represent Moody Bible Institute as an ambassador. We'll put information about his latest book at firstpersoninterview.com, and you can read more about our guests there as well. In one of my more unusual contacts with guests, I caught up with Joe on one of his many adventures with his wife Marty at a campground.
We're doing this from a camping trip that we're on down in the panhandle of Florida in January. And so, after I left Moody after 18 years and went back into the pastorate, then kind of a surprise season at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids. Then we retired, but I didn't retire from the kingdom. And so interestingly enough, Wayne, we were praying about, Lord, what would you have us do? I wasn't going to be the head cowboy at any more rodeos, but, I thought there might be something the Lord could use us. And I got a call from my very good friend, Mark Jobe, president of Moody. We've been friends for years. I have the highest respect for him. And he said, we're getting ready to launch a great vision at Moody. Would you be willing to come alongside and be on my team and help us get it done? I need someone with some experience. And so he said it can be part-time, which was really important because Marty and I want some space together. And so we're back in the kingdom, and I've got this amazing title, Wayne. Ready? Brace yourself.
Okay.
Global Ambassador and Special Assistant to the President at Moody Bible Institute. So, yeah, very impressive. So all of that to say, it's a wonderful season for us, and we're just so thankful. We look back in the rearview mirror and think about God's mercy and grace and the privileges he's bestowed upon us, his faithfulness through all the years to us. And so we're thankful people, and we're having a good time camping, too.
Yeah, good. Well, Joe, I'm a little jealous because I grew up camping in trailers much like you're living in this week, and it brings back a lot of great memories. Hey, before you became president at Moody back those years ago, you served in 3 pastorates. And your first pastorate in Ohio, I happen to be an 18-year-old member of that congregation. I've told that story many times, but it's a great memory.
We have such a long history. Wow. Exactly.
So let's talk about what God is doing in your life now. And by the way, I'm going to have to send you a bill for a new bookcase because you keep writing books and adding to my collection here, Joe. But let's talk about this book, This Light of Mine, Living Like Jesus in a Non-Jesus World. Why write this book at this stage of life for you, Joe?
Wow. Well, I've just been really concerned about the shift in our culture, as I think every Christian ought to be, quite frankly, and the sense that we've lost so much that we hold dear, and the cultural consensus has become so paganized, and so we all understand what's happened. But my concern was, Wayne, I'm not sure we really know what to do about it. And I think we're like little kids who want to help their dad with a project. Remember that? When your kids wanted to help you, but they got in the way and actually it was worse afterwards. Why is it that when they're 18, they don't help you with the project when they could be constructive? I don't know. But that when well-intendedly, we've really gotten in the way of the gospel. And my concern in the book is that the gospel needs to be an attractive thing to everybody, not just to people like us, but to progressives and people who disagree with us, and maybe even those who manage this societal drift today. Like, because I sense that in our attitudes and our actions, Wayne, we've actually alienated significant portions of the culture. And so I wonder, like the psalmist said, Psalm 11:13, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? That's our question. What can the righteous do? And I remember in Chronicles, it says that the sons of Issachar understood their times and they knew what to do. And what's really important is that Jesus told us what to do. And so, really, that's why I wrote the book. I said, how about if we as Christians, so concerned about the drift in our culture, can keep the gospel an attractive option for people in our world? And by the way, I do think, if I can just keep rambling on here for a minute, Wayne, I do think we have an amazing opportunity. I mean, people today in our culture are feeling the chaos, the anxieties, the suicide rates are soaring. They're feeling the emptiness of their lives, and the gospel has the answers: the peace of Jesus Christ and the healing of Jesus Christ. And so we have this phenomenal opportunity to bring the gospel today. And my passion in the book is that we understand how Jesus taught us to do it, and that in our attitudes and actions, that I think our attitudes and actions have gotten in the way of the gospel, that we could keep the gospel to be an attractive alternative. So that's what the book's about: living like Jesus in a non-Jesus world.
And I want to talk about this up front because I know it's important to you, and we'll talk later about our attitude and actions. But this clearly is not a call to withdraw from culture. We need to be salt and light.
No, thank you very much. I think there are several responses. You know, some of us are angry, some of us are in despair, some of us are hopeless. I remember speaking to a group of people, and I had the boldness, Wayne, to say, "I don't think we're going to get America back." and you know, normally when I preach, people fall asleep, but this was a little different. There was a guy in the front row whose body language, he actually kind of rose out of his chair and he said, "Oh no, what will we do?" And the despair was like just evident. And so, but I think people in our world who need Christ feel this despair today. It's a horrible world in which we live. But if we're despairing and we're hopeless and we're angry and we're anxious and confused, we have nothing to offer, right? Because that's what they already have. And so, how can we live attractive lives? And how can we then bring the gospel in an attractive way? And it's not withdrawing from the culture. Some people just get in their holy huddle and say, "I'll wait till Jesus comes back," right? That would be exactly the wrong thing to do. It's a matter of engaging our culture the way Jesus called us to do it.
So the key is this engagement issue, our attitude and actions, as you write about in this book, Joe. So let's dive in here on it a little bit. And what about our brothers and sisters who may see things differently than we do and may take a different approach?
Yeah, well, I think that be interesting what you think the different approaches might be. But if I just go to the attitudes and actions, I've just really recited some of them. You know, when we're despairing and we're angry and we're hopeless, we feel like we're the losers. It's not an attractive option for our culture. I remember talk about camping. I remember I opened the book with this story, actually, you know. So every campground, most of them have a shower house, bathhouse where you can take a shower, right, and wash the wilderness off your body. And so one morning I was walking down the street with my towel, and there's a guy in front of me with a towel. I'm going, "Oh, he's going to beat me to the shower." So we walked in, and he stopped to shave, and I get, "Good, I can get by him." And I went by him, and there were two shower stalls, and another guy was getting ready to get into the other shower stall. We said hello. He said, "You know what?" He said, "I used to be able to bring my little daughter down here, but in this day of trans and all this stuff, I would never dream of bringing." And then we stepped into the showers, and we could hear it, and that rant went on. Wayne, he just ranted about LGBTQ. How come they get their month? And then he was like, "What's with this not knowing what a woman is?" And then he picked out favorite political figures that he trashed. It was an amazing rant. So I said to him, I'm trying to lower the temperature. Yeah, but I've read the last chapter. I know who's won. And he said, yeah, but we got to fight. And I stepped out of the shower, and here's this guy who stopped to shave, who'd come down to wait to get into the shower, standing in line. And I thought, oh my goodness, he heard the rant. And I have to tell you, I was ashamed of the gospel. Think of me saying to him, hey, want to be a Christian? You could be just like us. That's the non-starter, right? And so these kinds of attitudes that we've had have really alienated so much of the population. And then the actions, I think the big action, and this is a very sensitive issue, of course, is that we've politicized our faith. When we have identified our faith with a political party or political positions, not moral positions, but political positions, then we alienate almost 50% of the population. There's like, how do you witness when, let's say your neighbor's got a front yard full of progressive signs, posturing him as the lead progressive? How do you bring Jesus to him? And if you've politicized your faith, then you're the political enemy. You don't represent Christ anymore. You represent a political party. And so I think the action there has been a serious challenge to us, and because we have alienated. I was watching the World Series, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. A lot of baseball uniforms had commercials on them. They not only wore the brand of their team on the front, but on their shoulder they had some other,
Yeah, an oil company or something like that.
yeah, yeah, exactly like that. And I thought to myself, if we brand Jesus politically, if we put a political brand on Jesus, then we're going to alienate a lot of people. And I thought, you know what? Jesus doesn't carry another brand. It's never a Jesus plus. He carries nobody's brands. He carries his own brand. And so that's one thing I deal with in the book. But I need to say that's not to say that we should not vote for someone who individually, not vote for someone who shares our values, that we shouldn't volunteer, that we shouldn't run for school boards, that we shouldn't become involved personally. But it's when corporately, when evangelicalism carries the brand of a political brand, that's when the problem comes. Barna did a survey a few years ago and basically said that most people see evangelicals through a political lens. So let's do it a different way. Let's see how we can do it the Jesus way. And that's what the book's about.
Living like Jesus in a non-Jesus world. More with Dr. Joe Stowell coming up on First Person. Here's Ed Cannon on the vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is Joe Stowell, whose new book is This Light of Mine, Living Like Jesus in a Non-Jesus World. And this is such a timely book, Joe, because we're all trying to find our way through this maze of culture and at the same time, of course, live up to biblical truth. Now, through years of listening to your teaching, Joe, you've always reminded us that we live in two kingdoms. And you write about those kingdoms in this book. So let's talk about it. What are these two kingdoms?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, because one of the key ways to understand how to live like Jesus in a non-Jesus world is to understand that there are two kingdoms. There's only really two, the kingdom of Satan and the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And so the kingdom of Satan rules the world in which we live, and Jesus came to advance his kingdom, to launch a whole new kingdom that ultimately would be eternal and in which we would be the ultimate victors forever. So anybody who feels like they're losers and feels down and discouraged as a Christian forgot the fact that they're really citizens of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And I think one thing that's interesting is that when Jesus came, the expectation was that the Messiah, Wayne, would be a political deliverer, that he would overthrow the Roman government and restore Israel to its former glory. He would sit on the throne, and Israel would be reignited again as their nation. And so he came and he claimed to be the Messiah, but he was a surprise because when he came, he didn't go up to Jerusalem and strike a deal with the political leaders on how they could overthrow Rome. He actually went down country, didn't he, and recruited a bunch of commoners, Wayne, like you and me.
Some of them were zealots.
Yes, some of them were zealots, exactly, who were part of the overthrow culture. And they went in and constant, if you read through the Gospels, here's his constant theme. He went out healing the sick and proclaiming the kingdom, healing the sick and proclaiming the kingdom of God. So the surprise is that he did not come to overthrow an earthly kingdom. He came to introduce a new kingdom. And in the book, I go into some detail on what is that new kingdom like, and that we're a part of that new kingdom. And I do ask the question in the book. I wonder if some of us, I think it's an important question. I wonder if some of us are more passionate about reclaiming an earthly kingdom than we are about advancing the kingdom of Jesus Christ through our lives. And I go back, I don't want to sound so redundant here, but I go back to the fact that advancing the kingdom of Christ is an attractive alternative to people in the world who are so despairing and the suicide rates are so, when Jesus went, he was an attractive option. He offered an attractive, crowds, just followed him because he had something different and new to offer them, and that was his kingdom and the values of his kingdom. And so I think that one of the things we have to do to live like Jesus in a non-Jesus world is to live as citizens of his kingdom and to offer his attractive alternative to everybody, progressives, our enemies, everybody who could possibly be interested in what we have.
Yeah. In having this conversation, I'm thinking of friends and loved ones who are in the public arena serving Christ in some way, and we don't want to discourage them. They have a tough job, and we know people who are living for Christ in the midst of all that.
No, absolutely. And I just want to go back and say what I said a little bit earlier. The challenge of politicizing our faith is really when we do it corporately. When our evangelical leaders endorse a candidate, when we platform candidates at our national evangelical gatherings. Personally, I think we're called to be good citizens, right? Unfortunately, for the early Christians, and I talk a lot in the book about how they won their world in the Jesus way, they couldn't vote the emperor out, right? They had no choice. But we have the opportunity to be good citizens. And as I said earlier, we need to vote to sustain the values that we think are important. We need to run for office. I have a friend who, by the way, worked with us at Moody, Wayne, who got so fed up with this stuff, he ran for Congress, and he's now in his fifth run of Congress and making a difference there. And one of the interesting differences he's making is that he helps to chair a bipartisan prayer group. And he told me this interesting story. He said, one of the most progressive congresswomen in the Congress every once in a while comes to the prayer meeting. And he says, we pray for her. We ask her, what can we pray for you? And he said, she leaves often with a tear in her eye and says to me, thank you so much for praying for me. I so needed this. So there's an enemy, right? Political enemy. And I think she's a lot closer to coming to know Jesus than she would have been if my friend in Congress had just shouted her down on the floor, right? So this is the way that we do it, and we walk that tightrope. But I do think we need to use every possible political advantage we have as personal individuals, but at the same time, we have to do it in ways that don't alienate those that need to hear the gospel.
Yeah, exactly. And where this impacts us, of course, is in the big policy decisions of our country, but in everyday life, it's going to come down to our relationships with our neighbors many times. Talk about that, if you would, and about the interactions we have every day with the people in our life.
Yeah, it's interesting that I have a whole chapter on that love is the central theme of what Jesus wants us to do in our world. And that's going to sound really soft to a lot of us who want to fight this battle out, but it is the Jesus way. So if you have to argue with him, don't argue with me over it. uh, but then, and there are four calls to love. We're to love God, we're to love our neighbor, we're to love our enemy, and we're to love one another. And every single one of those four things has the power of an attractive alternative to the world in which we live. And I think about loving our neighbor. That's the most daily thing we can do in Scripture, when your neighbor is not the person that lives next door only. It's anybody who crosses your path. So how can you love them and care for them and to meet their needs and to be sensitive to what they need and just bring your life and resources alongside of that? And that's a daily thing. I remember one time I was ending a run one morning and Marty said, "Hey, bring us a couple Starbucks back," because there was a Starbucks place really close to our house. So I went in, they had just opened up, and I went in there, and I was the second person to come in, and there was a guy in front of me with a $50 bill and the New York Times, and he's yelling at the barista, like, "What do you mean you don't have change?" And he's just, this poor boy, I felt so sorry for the barista. So I finally said, "Hey, I'll buy his newspaper for him." And the guy goes, "Really? Wow, thank you very much." And he walked out. He said, "All I have is yours," which evidently was not the $50 bill that was in his hand. And here's what the barista said to me. He said, "Mister, that was really a nice thing. This world would be a lot better place if there were more people like you." And I knew I should say something about Jesus, but I couldn't think, oh no, what to say. So as I'm leaving, I'm like, what could I have said? And then I thought, this is what I should have said to him. I should have said, "You know what? This world wouldn't be a better place if there were more people like me. It'd be a better place if there were more people like Jesus, because he taught me how to do this, right? To love my neighbor in that small way." So I thought, I'm going to go back and tell him. But when I went back, the line was so long, and I'm not, if I butt in the line and make a religious speech, it's not going to mean much. So I go, oh no. And then I realized I was wearing my old beat up Moody Bible Institute cap. And I thought to myself, maybe the kid saw my hat. Could he have seen my hat and know that Bible people, that God people do stuff like this? And I think maybe it boils down like this in summary, like if we're doing the Jesus way right, people will say these kinds of things. I don't get Christians, but our workplace is a lot better place because they work here. I don't get Christians, but our neighborhood is such a better place because they live here. And I have a lot of illustrations in the book how this kind of behavior does make it attractive to people who come to know Jesus Christ, because of, as Jesus says, it's our good works that shine the light into the world.
That's Dr. Joe Stowell, this week's first-person guest, talking about his new book, This Light of Mine, Living Like Jesus in a Non-Jesus World. You'll find a link to more information about the book and Joe's ministry at firstpersoninterview.com. I'm very thankful that the Far East Broadcasting Company assists in bringing these guests to you each week. FEBC's ministry extends far and wide, reaching people in their own language with a gospel message of hope and salvation. Listen for the daily radio feature FEBC Today on many radio stations, and download the podcast Until All Have Heard, which features FEBC President Ed Cannon with stories of God at work. Look for it at febc.org or with any podcast app. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.